From the south, General George Patton's Third Army applied relentless pressure. His forces moved with speed and determination, striking at weakened German positions and forcing them to fall back. German units that had once surrounded Bastogne now found themselves under threat of encirclement. The initiative had shifted completely. German High Command faced a difficult reality. Continuing the offensive was no longer possible. But withdrawing carried its own risks. Many units were already deep inside contested territory, with limited fuel and damaged supply lines. Initially, orders from above discouraged retreat. Positions were to be held. Ground was not to be given up, but on the battlefield, reality could not be ignored. Gradually, German commanders began to pull their forces back. The retreat, however, was far from organized. Roads were congested with vehicles, some operational, many destroyed or abandoned. Movement was slow and chaotic. Fuel shortages meant that not all equipment could be saved. Difficult decisions had to be made. Tanks and trucks were left behind. Heavy weapons were abandoned. In many cases, soldiers were forced to continue on foot. The cold made everything worse. Temperatures remained below freezing. Snow covered the landscape, slowing movement and draining energy. Soldiers marched for hours, often without adequate food or rest. Wounded men could not always be evacuated. Some were left behind, unable to continue. As German forces attempted to withdraw, Allied troops pressed forward. What had once been an advance was now a struggle for survival. During the retreat, losses increased. Without proper coordination and with constant pressure from Allied forces, German units became vulnerable. Attacks from the air and ground disrupted movement and caused further casualties. Across the Ardennes, the signs of collapse were everywhere. Burned-out vehicles blocked narrow roads. Abandoned equipment lay scattered across the snow. Smoke rose from destroyed convoys. The battlefield, once alive with movement and energy, now told a different story, one of exhaustion and failure. German soldiers, who had entered the offensive with determination, now faced a harsh realization. The offensive had failed, and beyond that, the war itself was slipping beyond recovery. By mid-January, Allied forces had regained much of the territory lost during the initial German advance. The bulge that had appeared in Allied lines was shrinking rapidly. Front lines began to stabilize, but the balance of power had clearly shifted. Germany had committed some of its last reserves to this operation. Tanks, experienced troops, and precious fuel. All had been spent. And in return, they had gained only temporary ground that could not be held. Perhaps the most significant loss was not territory, but control. The initiative was now firmly in Allied hands. From this point forward, Germany would no longer dictate the course of the war. For the soldiers on the ground, this truth became clearer with every passing day. Every abandoned tank, every failed attack, every order to fall back reinforced a single realization. They were no longer fighting to win. They were fighting to survive. As the final days of January approached, the intensity of combat in the Ardennes began to fade. The sounds of constant gunfire and explosions grew less frequent. In their place came an eerie quiet, broken only by the wind moving across the frozen landscape. Beneath the snow lay the remnants of a desperate offensive, shattered equipment, lost lives, and a plan that had failed. The last major German attack in the West had come to an end. And with it, any remaining hope of turning the war around. By the end of January 1945, the Ardennes battlefield had fallen quiet. But the silence carried the weight of failure. What remained was not victory, but the aftermath of a desperate gamble that had cost Germany some of its last strength. The snow-covered forests, once filled with movement and violence, now held abandoned vehicles, broken equipment, and the fading traces of an offensive that had come to nothing. The Battle of the Bulge was over, but for Germany, the consequences were just beginning. The offensive had drained resources that could not be replaced. Tanks had been lost, experienced soldiers killed or captured, and fuel, the most critical element, had been consumed or destroyed. What remained of the German army was weaker, less mobile, and increasingly unable to respond to the growing pressure from Allied forces. On the Western Front, the Allies wasted no time. American and British forces resumed their advance toward Germany. This time, there was no element of surprise, no sudden reversal,